Greetings and welcome to the Listen to Your Footsteps podcast. I'm Koja Buffett, and this podcast is an extension of my book by the same name. In the book Listen to Your Footsteps, I share in a collection of essays, anecdotes, and poems some of the lessons life has taught me on loss, identity, fatherhood, work, and everything in between. Having worked in various parts of the media, one of the things I've always appreciated has been the opportunity to also get a peek into the path that other people have taken. This podcast is an opportunity for me to continue to learn from others and hopefully to let you, the listeners, also gain from their wisdom. Thank you for opening yourself up to this and listening. Many moons ago, I had put out a call on Twitter for someone to help me with compiling what was to be my third poetry collection. My guest today answered that call. The poetry book was never completed, by no fault of hers, but she has gone on to do some amazing work in poetry and literature, all while completing an undergraduate degree and a master's in social anthropology. She's currently a PhD candidate while still continuing to write, perform, and live life wholeheartedly. Lebohang Masango reflects on writing children's books, feminism, academia, and becoming a woman, amongst other things. I hope you enjoy listening to this conversation as much as I did having it. Well, first of all, thank you for agreeing to do this.
Thank you for inviting me.
It's been interesting watching your journey over the last couple of years, but where I want to start is, where were you born and where did you grow up?
I was born in Stockholm, Sweden, and then my parents were freedom fighters / exiles. They were exiled to Sweden, and this is after they had been living all over the African continent. And by the time they came back to South Africa, I believe it was at the tail end of 1993, they came back with me for the first time. And around that time, there was the unrest happening with Shell House, which is now Lutuli House, and the IFP. And so my parents had to leave me with my grandmother in KwaNdebele. And that's where I really grew up the first years of my life when I was in South Africa with my gran. And then eventually we moved to Pretoria, I think when I was around 5 years old. And I started attending nursery school there while living with my mom and dad.
Did Sweden have is there any type of, impact or residues? Although you were born there, you came quite young. Would you say that it's influenced you in any particular way? Or it just happens to be a place you were born in?
For the most part, it's just a place that I was born in. I only feel connection to the place when my mother connects with people who still live there and who remember me when I was younger. And, we have conversations and they tell me all about myself when I was a toddler. But for the most part, no, it's just a place that I grew up in. I feel very connected to South Africa.
Mm. And what did you, as a child with your grandmother, what did the future look like? What was it that you wanted to do? Did you have any kind of idea or were you just kind of coasting through things?
I was definitely just coasting. And, my mother and I spoke about this the other day. My childhood for me was particularly interesting because there is a point where I met my mother. That's how it felt. I met her because I didn't even realize I had a mother until this woman who was very beautiful, but I don't think looked very much like me, came and started hanging out at my grand's house. And apparently she was my mom. And, I was living the life of being my grandmother's child. This woman was always like, Ankhalema, always like telling me, Lebo, stop it. Don't do this, don't do that. And it was just incredibly confusing that this strict woman was my mom, because also that wasn't a concept that I really understood, considering that everywhere I looked, all my friends were being raised by their grandmothers, really. And so I didn't have an idea of what I wanted to be growing up, because I really was trying to figure out this relationship with this very, very strict lady. And eventually, I suppose, we settled into a groove. And then when I started attending nursery school, especially when I moved to Pretoria, then like Mohale, I was listening to her interview with you. I wanted to be a hairdresser at some point. I wanted to be a firefighter at some point. And when I was watching the Magic School Bus and totally loving Miss Frizzle and Where on Earth is Carmen San Diego, I started having an interest in notions of exploring the world. And as I started to read, then, that became a little bit more possible. So I just knew that I wanted to do something out there in the world, although I wasn't sure what yet.
What I find interesting is that, I mean, today you seem very deliberate about the steps that you're taking to achieve something. So when did you make that transition from going to explore and figure out what I want to do with my life to the person that you are today, which, I mean, from the outside, like I said, from the outside looking in, it feels very deliberate. It feels very calculated and planned.
I think that transition happened really when I read a book by Shonda Rhimes called The Year of Yes, and I read it around late 2016. And she is the producer and writer and creator of Grey's Anatomy, which was my favorite thing at the time. It was my emotional catharsis. I loved it very much. And when I found out she had a book, I bought it immediately and I read it. And the lesson that she was emphasizing in that book is that, no matter how fearful or anxious we may be, there comes a time where you just have to say yes. We might not realize that saying no or shying away for things, you might not realize what the cumulative effect of all of that fear and anxiety and saying no is in your life. So just for a moment, pause and say yes to as much as you can. And I tried to apply that in my life, and it really started to show results. I really felt like I was more in control of my artistic and creative practice, and I felt like people were receiving me in the ways that I was intending, So the intentionality of my practice was starting to pay off in a way that was really rewarding. So I think I made the transition back then, because before that, I was writing sad girl poems. And I love my sad girl poems, but, something would happen, for instance, I'd be having a good day, and then someone would quote something on Twitter. And then just like that, I'd be taken back, because, all of these poems are coming from a real experience. So I'd be taken back to that experience, and just like that, my day's been ruined. And I was just like, something has got to give, because this is not a life. I'm not enjoying this anymore. And so I kind of make a declaration. I might have tweeted it as well to say, I'm not writing sad girl poems anymore. I don't want to be the sad girl wonder anymore. I really want to give myself a chance at being very happy. And so that also helped me to get to a space where I was intentionally seeking out joyful things to write.
I want to share a thought and ask a question. So the question is, how did you come to poetry? The thought is, the interesting thing for me was, because I came to poetry as, let's call it, a form of therapy. In my dark moments, that's when I wrote. And something I do write about in my book is I eventually went through rehab, which is its own thing. But when I came out of rehab, I had to learn how to write happy. Write without the angst, without the, woe is me, but just I'm in a good mood and I'm going to sit down and still write poems. And I think it took me about 10 months to get there. So going back to the question, how did you come to poetry?
Yeah, it was similar for me. I was feeling a lot of sadness, a lot of darkness, especially around my parents' divorce, which just happened in a really annoying and traumatic way. And so I kept carrying all of that around with me. And as I kept reading, and as I kept being as I kept reading and I wanted to try to express myself through that form, it started out with keeping a journal, and just writing all of my sad thoughts somewhere. And then over time, it evolved into writing poetry, especially when I realized that there was such a thing as spoken word. Then I tried to give shape to these words in a different kind of way. So, yeah, that's how I came to it at first. And it brought me a lot of joy. Not joy necessarily, but that practice of expression, that practice of having an outlet and giving all these dark feelings somewhere to go. There was something about that felt really good, and being able to share and have it be received well also felt good, because it felt like, okay, so there's something productive that I can do with this pain and hurt. So for the longest time, that's what poetry was about to me, having something productive to do with the various pains and hurts that I was feeling.
Those two things were they attached to each other? Do they complement each other? The writing of the poetry with the sharing of the poetry. And the reason why I asked that is because, you just touched on that briefly now. for me, they were always separate. So the writing of the poetry I did for a very long time. And then the sharing of the poetry, the fact that you could get up on a stage and mumble your words and people would listen to it, for me happened kind of much, much later. And so there's always been a tension between the two.
I think for me, the writing came first because also I was very nervous with even proclaiming out there that I was a poet. I didn't even want to claim that for a very long time because I was just because there was a time when it was just for me. And in that time when it was just for me, it was healing me. It was helping me. It was helping me to find new things to read. It was allowing me to find my way in the world of literature. So it was for me for a while. And for a while, I mean like a year or two. And then and in high school, there were talent shows and things. And I was like, okay, I'm going to try and see if I can put this out there. So the stuff that was really about my pain, I kept that to myself. But then I realized that I had an interest in, politics. And, South Africa will always give you something interesting to think about and say when it comes to what happens in our country. So that I was able to share more readily. So all the political stuff, definitely shared that as soon as I had written it down. And then the more personal stuff, I kept to myself for a little longer.
There's also musicality to your poetry. There's a relationship with music, which is, I guess, overt as well as very subtle in your poetry. Where does that come from? I mean, particularly jazz. Like you had that period. I don't know if you're still in that period, but you had that period where jazz was the thread that seemed to run through a lot of your work.
Yeah. So what was happening around that time is as I'm developing and becoming a baby feminist, you realize that so much of, because I love hip hop, and hip hop and the lyricism and the ingenuity of the art form has carried me through so much. And I realized that, I would never be Lil' Kim, but I could also find my way in all of this by writing and being authentic to myself. And of course, we have kind of the spoken word element of poetry, which leaned so closely towards hip hop. And so that's where I found myself. And so as I'm growing and thinking and reading and learning, you come to realize that actually there's so much misogyny in hip hop and you can't even get away from it no matter how much you try. And it's in that time where I was looking for another genre, and so many hip hop musicians had collaborated with jazz musicians, or had sampled their work, or had referenced them somehow. And so that's when I started to go back into my father's jazz collection. And that's where I started to really love that music a little bit more because, even when my parents came back from exile and all of their friends came back, jazz was the centerpiece of all of our gatherings at whoever's house it was. There was braai, there was alcohol, there was jazz everywhere. So it was really happy music for me. And so I was able to go back into jazz to relearn it from my childhood. And that's where I really found a lot of comfort. And, on a very practical level, it's nice to know that even though some of these musicians, did not lead the most feminist lives, argue, and that's okay. Not everyone's going to lead a feminist life. So even though their lives are not reflective of some of my politics, the fact that they were not swearing at me on the song felt really good. And so I could listen to the music and explore. So yeah, that's what that jazz element is about in my work.
I want to jump a bit. I do want to come back to a little statement that you made about you can't be Little Kim. But before we get to that, where does anthropology fit into all of this? When I met you, you were still doing your undergraduate degree, and like the poetry, like let's call it the storytelling, the music, you've also you're the one person that I think has done a lot for anthropology for, let's call it, younger generations, as well as, people such as myself, where you don't think about anthropology as something that fits within a contemporary, let's call it contemporary African context, because we all have a very kind of layperson's and very narrow view of what an anthropologist does. At least, I do, or I did. So where does anthropology fit into all of this? When was that decision to go, okay, I'm going to go to university and this is what I'm going to study?
So anthropology was a complete accident. because when I was registering at Wits University, and my mother gave me very clear instructions, right? You're going to become a diplomat. So I want you to become an ambassador of some country because then you can travel and see the world. So you're going to do international relations, you're going to do politics, and whatever else fits in with that. So I said, yes, mom. So I went to the university desks and I registered for those two. And then I had two more things. So sociology sounded all right. So I signed up for that. And then I needed the last one. And as I'm looking around, there was this woman with this really like warm and radiant smile. And I went to her and I asked her about anthropology, and she kind of explained it. I still didn't understand, but I said, just because this woman is so warm and friendly, in a sea of faces, she just had this really warm disposition. And so I signed up for anthropology, and she later would become one of my favorite lecturers, Dr. Kelly Gillespie. And so as I was going through undergrad, anthropology was the thing that I happened to be best at, because, first year, second year, third year, it's a bit of a blur because you're living by yourself for the first time, and, you are out all over the place. So the studies become a blur, but anthropology was the one thing that I really was good at without too much effort, because I really do have an interest in stories. I really do have an interest in people, cultures, languages, and the way people come together to form social groups. Those are my favorite subjects. That's what I majored in. After graduation, I decided to get a job and to figure out what I'd like to do for the rest of my path, because my mother's big concern about anthropology was, so what are you going to do? What do anthropologists do? It's not something she was familiar with at all. She hadn't seen anyone being a successful anthropologist. And to be honest, I shared those concerns as well. But I didn't want to let her know that I don't know what I'm doing, because then she was just going to make me more anxious. So I was like, no, Mom, I know what I'm doing. I've got this. So I left school after graduation, and then I went to go work a little bit. And I worked in a really fantastic, fun corporate environment that was very laid back. But as laid back as it was still a corporate environment, and it was wonderful, but it was also really draining because it didn't align with whatever it is I was supposed to be doing, even though I wasn't sure what that is. So by the time I went back to do my honors, which was like the following year, then things kind of clicked into place, because when you do a postgrad degree in the humanities, that's when you have more control of what it is you are doing. You can chart your own research, you can decide what you want to read to an extent. And so that's when things really started to flow where anthropology is concerned, because the way I saw it is that anthropology, I feel, is a storyteller's discipline. And even though it has been responsible for, I believe it has been responsible for so much of the racism, the white supremacy, the social injustice that we see in the world today. And just because I decide not to do it doesn't mean it's going to stop. Anthropology continues whether I'm there or not. And considering that it was so foundational in creating so many disparaging and violent narratives, then I have chosen to enter that field in order to be part of what can be a change in that space, So I'm particularly interested in work around Black women and ensuring that I bring a humane, ethical, dignified lens in telling those stories. And that's, for me, what anthropology is about. And what I realized is the more I learned in anthropology, the more I opened myself to it, especially the way it's being taught at Wits University, honestly, the more I was able to strengthen my poetic practice, because my lecturers encouraged me to see how I can marry the two, For one of my assessments for, I believe, masters, I was allowed to submit a poem. We were thinking about Hegel, Haiti, and the concept of universalism, and I was allowed to submit a poem, and I got an A for that. So the fact that we're constantly being pushed to be interdisciplinary, the fact that we're constantly being pushed to bring anthropology into the contemporary and think about storytelling and think about problem solving right now, I think is a very powerful thing. And so that's what makes me gravitate towards it so much. It has given my storytelling a very strong theoretical grounding. So even when I'm writing for children and when I'm writing poetry, I'm doing that as an anthropologist because I understand the gravity of my words. Regardless of who reads or accesses my work, I understand the gravity and the responsibility of narration.
which forces you to be a lot more, I guess, deliberate and a lot more conscious of what your words are saying,
Exactly.
what your words are implying, as opposed to just simply, saying on the surface.
Exactly. And that was the like when I wrote Mpumi's Magic Beads, that was the biggest thing for me to grapple with, because it's like, yes, it's a story for children, but there's a lot here in how this is being constructed, and there's a lot here in what I'm not saying that is also communicating as well. So I love that anthropology has given me the ability to write in a way that the silences are saying something as well, as much as the words are saying something, as much as I can do that in anthropology. Yeah.
You are listening to the Listen to Your Footsteps podcast. Conversations with Africans who are navigating this world on their own terms, all while trying to live life to the best of their ability.
In reality, I'd say a lot of the challenges that we have in the world is tied to the unspoken. I mean, I've worked in the media for years, and I always say I'm always looking out for what's being left out, as opposed to what's being said, because what's being said often directs the gaze, or influences where the attention goes. And if my attention is being pulled left, I want to know what's happening on the right, because perhaps my attention is being pulled so that something else can be done that I'm not noticing.
Yeah, exactly. There's so much in, like you say, the unspoken, in the silences, when you ask people to pay attention to something, what is happening under the cover of darkness where people are not paying attention to, and what do we produce in the unspoken as well, because it's a very productive space as well.
And so you wrote a children's book, and it also just felt very left field. You'd been building as a poet. We were seeing you like doing music stuff and in that kind of space. And then all of a sudden there you are with the children's book, going around reading stories to children. How did that come about?
So children's books are really, they were like, I suppose, my first friends, because I was an only child for a few golden years. And in those years, I really enjoyed reading, and I really enjoyed going out into the garden and playing out what was in my books and climbing trees and discovering things. So children's books have always been a place of joy for me. And so when I was busy with my master's thesis, which was incredibly difficult, I suppose, and difficult because I was carrying the burden, my own burden of wanting to do something that has never been done before. So I was just stressed out that entire time. And I was grappling with these theories and like, oh no, is this a thesis if I don't mention Marx, and I hate Marx. And so I was just grappling with that kind of thing. And I was like, I need to read something that will make me happy. And all of these academic texts are not doing that. And so I found a book by Atinuke, the Anna Hibiscus series. So I bought one, and then I bought two, and then I bought three. And now I'm building up a whole collection because her writing for children is so delightful. And I was like, oh, I would love to do this. I would love to make someone feel like this. If I feel like this and as an adult, what I know for sure then is this path requires so much mastery, because this is fabulous and I want to try to do this, and I'd love to write something that challenges me. And at the same time, while I love poetry, I also, because of my own declaration to myself that I don't want to be a sad girl Wanda anymore, which is a motif that I often use in my poems, it was also a space, poetry is also increasingly competitive, right? And I remember when we first met, like, I loved that about poetry. Like, I was like, inside the slam situation. And then as I got older, I was,
which is funny because when we first met, that's when I had stepped away from it and I was just focusing on actually writing because of that very thing. Because I struggled with, let's call it, the competitiveness of it.
And Kojo, I remember, you'd express some of those sentiments and I didn't get it, because obviously I was still inside, I didn't get it. And then as I grew older, I'm like, Kojo was saying something. He saw, because this is not it. Like, and my creativity, my spirituality, my happiness, like, this is not the space to foster those things. Koja was right. I'm not doing this anymore, really. And so as I stepped away from poetry, although I mean, I still do perform, I still do write, I still love doing those things. I guess I found a way to not do that in the slam environment. And that's why I was so keen to be one of the hosts for Word and Sound. I think I did that for a year or two because firstly, I love Word and Sound. And secondly, I wanted to be a host who would bring a lot of love into the space and who would bring a lot of encouragement into the space. And not to say no one before me did that, but I just wanted to be that in that space. And I think I did it well. So yes, back to children's books. I just stepped away from that. And then I realized that, there's a lot of joy in this. And this is another kind of challenge that I can give to myself. And if I am to be a writer and if I am to be an anthropologist, and something that my lecturers had always taught me is that, what is anthropology if you're going to take people's stories and lock them in the ivory tower? And anthropology that is good for people is one that not only goes back to the people that you work with to explain to them and to show them what you have done with their stories, but it's one that other people can access as well. This is also in the moment of decolonization and those calls during Fees Must Fall. And I was thinking, really, what can I do with anthropology? How can I spread it to people? And there is a bit of my anthropology in the children's book and in the books that I write. Children are a valuable, important audience for knowledge as well.
How do you navigate the crafter? Because writing, I believe, writing is a muscle, but also each form requires its own lens. And I mean, it's often been said that writing for children is probably the hardest thing to actually do. How do you jump between those? How do you jump from a master's thesis to, Mpumi and Magic Beats and then a poem?
Yes, I agree that it is very hard to write for children. And what I had to do was I had to seriously refresh, and I continue to refresh, So I have a very, very big collection of children's books. I read those all the time. And just to familiarize yourself, as you do, I suppose, with poetry, you familiarize yourself with techniques, with language, with the conventions and the norms of a book. And I'm really, really proud of my venture into children's writing because my first book was self-published. And I remember saying to myself, I want this book to look and read and feel like any book that you would pick up in a children's school library because it is good. Because, if it's in a children's school library, those librarians selected it for those children. And so this to be that kind of book that you'd find in a library. And so I studied while doing my master's during the day. At night, because this was my passion project, I would stay up at all hours Googling, studying, buying and reading, going to all the bookstores. I have a friend who has 4 children. So just like hanging out with them, although I love hanging out with them anyway, but hanging out with them and paying attention to the kinds of stories that they liked as well. And, teaching myself, what a spine, the different kinds of stitches for the spine, the cover, the paper thickness, what goes on the front matter, end papers, what makes those interesting. And really looking at the differences and the similarities across all the books that I loved. And then until I sat down and I said, okay, now it's my turn. I'm going to do this too. How do I jump between the two? I think because right now children's writing is such a space of joy for me. I think one thing though that I struggled with for a little while was how will I sustain this, because with poetry, the thing that was scary there is like, I can't keep getting myself into clumsy emotional situations so that I have material to write, because there was a very irresponsible time in my life where I was living like that. I was like, no, let's just let whatever happen because we're going to write about it after. That's a madness. Who does that? So I was like, okay, that's not a sustainable creative practice. So how am I going to sustain myself here where there is no chaos and I don't have children and my siblings are old? How am I going to sustain this? But I think that's when also I came across, my friend recommended a book called The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron. And yes, and so in there, she emphasizes that connection between your creativity and spirituality. She emphasizes the importance of filling yourself. She emphasizes the importance of, inspiration and how you can even, how your own productivity in different ways can lead to inspiration. And so I started to take art. I have always loved the arts, but I started to take it even more seriously that I must go to the theater. I must go watch a jazz show. I must go buy a new children's book, and I must just fill myself up constantly with various kinds of artistic inspiration, because the story will come when it comes. And eventually that is what has happened in my life, you know. Like, I had insomnia, and what did I do with it? I sat up and I wrote a book, you know, and that story is complete now, because I just really believe in being patient with myself, in filling my cup always, and taking very long walks, because the story will always come. So yeah, I'm happy, because now that I'm working with poetry, with children's books, and with anthropology, my brain really is getting better at switching between them and doing what needs to be done for each. But it's constantly a practice, yeah.
Are you gentle with yourself? Because sometimes, you know, from the outside looking in, it always looks like there's so much going on. I mean, you talk about Julia Cameron's The Artist's Way, and I still haven't gone through the entire thing. I kind of just got stuck at morning pages and artist date. And I mean, I journal every morning, which was inspired by, you know, I do my morning pages every day.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I mean, do you take artist dates, and do you find space for yourself?
Yes. So the morning pages is the thing that it was putting me through hell. I couldn't sustain that, because and she does explain why it would be difficult. So for me, it was difficult. And other blogs that I tried to read up on morning pages were like, okay, it's going to feel really crappy sometimes, but you have to. I could not do it, so I stopped. But the one thing I've taken seriously, which I mentioned kind of in a different form, is the artist date, you know. Just being out there and filling my cup with other people's artistic genius has been the best thing, and I take it very seriously. So that's the thing that
that's funny, because I mean, for me it's the other way around, right? Like I found a rhythm on the morning pages, and I do them every day. It's like tied into my routine. But the artist date, I'm like, I recognize the need for it, but I've just never been able to get it done.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess that also comes with where you are in life, right? Because I suppose fatherhood and husbandhood would put a limitation on that kind of thing, you know? Whereas, like, you know, I don't have any of that, so I really, like, this is my form of socializing, you know? Going out there and getting an artist day. It's not always by myself, but it still gets done. And in terms of being gentle with myself, I really think I am gentle with myself, because I don't set a morning alarm. So I allow my body clock to do whatever it needs to do. And that, I guess, is helped by the fact that I've always worked from home, even pre-pandemic, because my work is academic and writing-based. So I can wake up whenever my body chooses to. And I realized that being gentle with myself means running every day. And that's hard, but I feel better, I think better, and I write better when I do it. My ideas are better when I do it. So, you know, I think for me, being gentle with myself is discipline. Waking up when I want to, but having a very strict Google calendar system, having very strict Excel spreadsheet system for all my projects, having very strict designations of what I do when, you know. And right now I've put myself on leave until Tuesday, because I realized, okay, that's what I need, so that's what we're doing. And no one gets to tell me not to do it, or I have to put a notice. There's something very freeing about my lifestyle. And yeah, being my own boss, I suppose, as they say.
So I want to go back to something that you said earlier on that I did say I wanted to touch on. And so you made the statement about your baby feminism when you're being a baby feminist. And then you made a statement about not being able to be little Kim. And to a certain extent, it's a difficult world for women in general, but you have come into, let's call it your womanhood, or you've come into your adulthood at a time when, at least in some quarters, there is the recognition that a woman can be all of those things. You know, so you can be, you can eventually be Dr. Masango and have tattoos and like hip hop and yada, 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 right?
Yeah.
I'm trying to find the right question. What's that journey been like in terms of, sometimes it's felt like you're very conscious of it, and you're navigating, telling the story. Other times it's felt like you pushing against like a wall that's actually pushing back. I remember with your tattoos as you started increasing your tattoos, and then you get these different attitudes towards that. So I'm trying to get a sense of what that journey has been like in terms of finding comfort in, let's call it your personhood or in your womanhood, just with all of the stuff that's going on in the world around us.
So I think ever since I was young, I've always been very interested in being special and also marking myself apart. And as I grew into, girlhood and womanhood, just realizing how unfair the world was on women and seeing that in my own family and in society at large. And so the tattoos were a way for me to mark myself apart very early, just to say that this story is not going to become my own. And one way to preclude myself very starkly from the story and where it ends up for so many women is by these adornments, because by doing this, I've already I've already counted myself out from a lot of people's gaze, which I needed to do so that I could just focus on myself. And so it started as that. And, interestingly, the interesting thing with feminism and being a teenager and also trying to find my voice and trying to be a poet and trying to express myself is that, there were many things that weren't actively, it's like how you mentioned, the wall. There are many things that are not actively pushing against me, but I had to exert myself against them because I recognize that these things are going to be boundaries to my freedom sooner or later. And I suppose being a girl in my body or a woman in my body, eventually, it was just going to count against me. So the tattoos were just a way to just do something about that, right? Even though there's not much you can do about your body and society and how society reacts. But yeah, that was a way to mark myself apart. And this journey has been interesting because so much of the learning and growing also happened on the internet and with social media. And there was a big feminism boom that I experienced from around 2014 to 2017 at most. That's when I was most active within it. And there's so much growth that took place there. I learned so much. I read so much, and I'm really grateful to have experienced Twitter feminism in its golden age at that time, because it really has made me a woman who understands that you can be anything and everything that you want to be. And being the academic that I am knows that there are actually political and theoretical limitations to all of that. You can want to be a woman who has it all and does it all, and you can, but there are limitations to whether you're a feminist or not. And not everyone wants to hear that all the time. But yeah, it's been a great and interesting journey to mark myself apart and to work and grow within that.
Random, how did you decide on the tattoos? I mean, the tattoos that you have. And I asked this question having a sense of some of them, but yeah.
So,
and I say this having said to my children, I believe that one should only get tattoos after the age of 28, because when you're younger than that, you think you're going to live forever. So when somebody says this is going to be on your body for the rest of your life, it's a very abstract concept. And I added that because I know that you got yours much younger than 28.
Yeah, and and as you say that, I'm remembering that I did have 1 year of regrets. About 3 years ago, I was like, man, I was seriously looking up tattoo removal specialists, and I was like, right, it's all going. We are starting over, right? But I was having a crisis of femininity at the time. That's very funny. So, in terms of the tattoos, it started with the poetry. I was reading some American poets. I was reading Alice Walker, and Alice Walker has written great things about the relations between men and women. So I was reading Audre Lorde, I was reading Alice Walker, and Audre Lorde, Alice Walker. So the first one is an Alice Walker quote from the end of her poem called, "Did this happen to your mother? Did your sister throw up a lot?" I won't say what it is because that's a little bit personal, but it's in that poem, and it's very powerful. It's like a knife to the heart. It's stunning. It's a stunning line. So I got that first, and I got that I think when I was 19. And interestingly, when I think about it, and when we think about words being, when we think about the power of words and how words can create reality, there was a time when I was like, have I put this on my arm and now created a reality in which I am doomed, because it is a declaration that I live with every day. But at the same time, I needed to get it. It was therapeutic for me because it is such a powerful statement against any past and future nonsense that any person of the other gender will ever try to put me through. Like, it's a declaration that, no, this is not about to go down. And for me, that was incredibly empowering. But I was like, okay, have I marked myself to doom? Of course, I don't feel that way anymore. And now I'm able to really appreciate my tattoos as being a story, of being a way of marking who I was at a particular time. And I'm able to reflect on them all really with so much joy. And now my current thing is, when I write a book, I add a character or I add something to do with my book-ish journey on my leg. Because at first I wasn't going to do images. I was only going to do poetry quotes. And then I realized that actually I really love books. I'm going to get a very big stack of books on my leg. And then that evolved into, I hate flying, but sometimes I have to fly because the better and stronger version of who I am is on the other side of the world, and I have to go meet her there. So we'll get on airplanes. So I got an airplane, and I got a globe, and I got a typewriter, and I got other things just to kind of mark my journey and my feelings. So that's what my tattoos are about. And even though I was having a crisis of femininity a few years ago, I am now fully back to loving them and enjoying them.
So what's my last question? Kind of what's the plan? What's the next couple of years look like? I mean, once you're done with your PhD, or is it the PhD?
Okay. It's the PhD. My submission date is 2024, so it's me and this thing for a few more years. Yeah, my submission date is 2024. I asked for an extension and they granted me one, so doing this until 2024. Hopefully I've got a book coming out next year. this time next year, hopefully I will have a book for adults. So I'm working on that currently. And lots of children's book, hopefully finding new ways to venture with the books. I'm working on some of those as well. But really, Kojo, one thing I wanted for my life when I realized, when the realization hit me, is that I just want to live forever. I want to be immortal. And I realized that the way that people can be immortal is through their work. So I want children to find me in their libraries when I'm gone. And I want people to reference me for whatever as well when I'm gone. And for me, that's the immortality that I'm seeking. So I'm going to keep working on that.
How do you, I know I said it was my last question, but I'm just thinking, you're saying 2024, right? So you're essentially existing in two times. So there's the now and there's the stuff that you're doing, and there's the life that you're living now. And then there's this thing that you're working towards. Maybe it's because I haven't been in school for so long. So the idea of doing stuff that's only going to manifest on a very specific deadline. Right? It's only going to be in 2024,
Mm-hmm.
How do you make sense of that? Is it something that you think about at all? Or is it just me and my hang-ups?
No, I don't think about it at all, because, I mean, as writers, we know deadlines, So with being an academic, I've just had to adjust myself to the fact that sometimes those deadlines are very far. But what my master's thesis taught me is that the deadline is far, but you are going to cry if you don't do the work every day. And I was crying very often. So yeah, 2024 seems far away, but I'm working so hard on this thing that it's even irrelevant how far it is, because every part of this is just so crucial and requires so much of me, So it always feels like an immediate, important, everyday thing, if that makes sense.
That does, actually. When you said it, then I think that example of, when I was writing my book, I was just focused on, I wake up and today I write towards the book. And I didn't think about, I wasn't thinking about, okay, so when the book is done, this is what's going to go on. It was just every morning I woke up, and after I did my morning pages, I'm like, okay, I need to put an hour towards my book because there is a deadline.
Yeah, it's exactly like that. You just do what is required at the time. And before you know it, really, the days, the weeks, the months go by, and it's time to submit, right?
Why PhD?
A PhD
I mean,
because
Dr. Lebohang Masango sounds nice, but why?
I love the sound of that. So a PhD, I had to also ask myself, like, why are you doing this to yourself? Because you don't particularly enjoy the painful bits of this. So why do you keep doing it? And I realized that I really am committed to being the best at what I do. I want to give my personal best at everything I do. So if I'm going to be an anthropologist, to see that to its logical conclusion and to be the best anthropologist I can be means I have to master all levels beyond being a master and be the doctor of philosophy. But also along the way to get to that PhD, there is so much, there's so much mastery, there's so much work, there's so much discipline, there's so much knowledge that I also take in. And so I want to reach those pinnacles because because I realized also when I got my graduate degree, when I got my bachelor's degree, I realized that I wasn't an anthropologist yet. So I'm like, okay, when I get my honors, no, you're still not an anthropologist. Okay, when I got my master's, then I was an anthropologist. And look, I had spent so much time and money on these degrees that I had to be the thing that I was studying. So once I became an anthropologist, I was like, okay, it wouldn't hurt to do this one more time. And also just to, like my mom, Shame, she was really worried she couldn't see where this thing was going. And so just for my mom, just to give her a daughter who's a doctor, you know?
Yeah, it's funny because when I only did my undergrad degree, but when I graduated, that was when I had the epiphany. It's like the only important degree is actually a master's. Because with the undergrad, even before I got my knee down, they were like, thank you very much. And I'd already been tapped and I was being sent off down the side. Whereas people, their masters, they were called up and somebody stood there and read their accomplishments. And I was like, okay, well, I guess if I ever want that, then this is what I'm going to have to do. But I'm the opposite in that I was raised by an academic who always used to say you must understand the value or why you're doing something. And I've never been able to answer the question. I mean, when everybody's doing MBAs, I'm like, I've never been able to get a sense of why I'd go and do it. And so I'm constantly like, when I get to that stage where I can go study for the sake of studying, I'd probably just go do literature or something just for the hell of it.
That would be cool. That would be a nice chapter for you, you know, if you become Professor Kojo of the African Literature Department in Germany. Wouldn't that be nice?
Yeah, the time is running out. Yeah. I'm not getting any younger. That's all good.
Yeah, and that's why professor's a job for older people, so, you know, sounds good.
All good, but thanks a lot, eh?
Oh, you're welcome, and thank you for having me. I mean, I appreciate that you found me fit to be on your podcast, and I really love the title of your book, by the way. It makes me think of, there's a song by, what are they called? There is a band. It's called the Block Party. They have a song called The Prayer, and the opening lines are, God give me grace and dancing feet and the power to impress. And as a ballerina and as a dancer, like, my feet and discipline has always been an important notion to me. So when you explained the title, Listen to Your Footsteps, and how it came about, like, it just really resonates with me. So I love your title.
I totally thank you, but I totally forgotten about you, Lebohang the ballerina. When I first met you, you were still kind of trying to make sense of, do I want to keep doing this or do I want to shift?
Yeah. It's a very...
Do you still dance at all?
No, I don't, but I will go to every new dance production happening out there. I love that I found out early that dance just wasn't going to be my path because it didn't give me enough expressive control. At the end of the day, you cannot express yourself better than in words. And I couldn't sing. So it was very obvious what kind of, expressing of words I was going to do. And I'm glad I found that out early because then, I didn't waste time trying to continue with dance. Yeah.
Cool. All right. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Kojo.
Sure. I'll talk to you soon.
Cool. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to Listen to Your Footsteps podcast. This episode was edited by Tatenda, Dizha. Show theme music by Lebohang. Please do subscribe and leave a review wherever you're listening. and share with friends you feel would enjoy the conversation. I'd also appreciate thoughts and/or comments on my site, kojobaf.com.